Captain Hyen-Woo Park stood on the bridge of the human exploration vessel, indomitable as it moved through the dark space between stars. The ship was not large compared to the massive vessels other species built, but it was fast and quiet. That was how humans preferred to travel through the galaxy. They watched and learned while others made noise and demanded attention. The bridge was calm and peaceful. The crew worked at their stations without speaking much. They had learned long ago that space was dangerous and required focus. Captain Park looked out at the stars and thought about how far humanity had come since first leaving Earth. They had built colonies on dozens of worlds and made contact with many alien species. Most of these meetings had been peaceful, but some had not. Dr. Soman Lee sat at her station monitoring communications from across the galaxy. She was the ship's expert on alien life forms and had spent years studying the different species that ruled various parts of space. Her job was to understand how these species thought and what they might do next. Today she was listening to signals from the Valkyrie Empire, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The Valkyrie were a species that looked like giant insects with hard shells covering their bodies. They had been conquering worlds for hundreds of years and never showed mercy to anyone who opposed them. Their empire stretched across thousands of star systems, and they had destroyed many civilizations that tried to resist them. Now they were looking toward human space with hungry eyes. Dr. Lee turned to Captain Park with a worried expression on her face. She had intercepted a transmission that was being broadcast to all human colonies. The message was simple and terrifying. The fleet commander named Vekvar was giving humanity an ultimatum. All human worlds had 72 hours to surrender completely or face total destruction. The message played on the bridge speakers in the harsh clicking language of the Valkyrie. The translation system converted the words into human speech, but the meaning was clear even without translation. The Valkyrie had already proven they meant business by attacking 3 human frontier worlds. These planets had been completely destroyed, turned into balls of melted rock and burning gas. Nothing lived there anymore. Captain Park listened to the message twice before speaking. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed the anger he felt inside. He had seen what the Valkyrie did to conquered worlds. They did not just defeat their enemies, they erased them completely from existence. Any species that surrendered to them became slaves, and any species that resisted was eliminated forever. On the colony world of New Busan, Commander Jin-Ho Kim received the same transmission in his military command center. He was responsible for defending the Outer Rim territories where humans had built their newest settlements. These worlds were far from Earth and had small populations, which made them easy targets for attack. Commander Kim knew that his forces could not stop a full Valkyrie invasion. The numbers were simple and frightening. The Valkyrie Empire commanded over 10,000 warships of various sizes. Their smallest vessels were larger than most human battleships, and their largest ships could destroy entire moons. Humanity had built only 800 ships that could fight in space, and most of these were designed for exploration rather than warfare. Commander Kim called his staff together for an emergency meeting. The officers gathered around a holographic display that showed the positions of human colonies and Valkyrie fleets. The picture was not encouraging. Valkyrie ships were already moving toward human space from multiple directions. They had been planning this attack for months, possibly years. Deep in the underground bunkers of New Busan, engineer, the Jin Choi, worked frantically to prepare evacuation protocols for the civilian population. She had been studying recordings of previous Valkyrie attacks and had noticed something strange about their ship designs. The Valkyrie vessels used a particular type of reactor that produced a unique energy signature. This information might be important, but she was not sure how it could help against such overwhelming force. Engineer Choi sent her analysis to Captain Park aboard the Indomitable. She hoped that someone with more military experience might understand the significance of what she had discovered. The Valkyrie ships all used the same basic technology, which meant they might all share the same weaknesses as well. Back on Earth, Admiral Bioram Seo received reports from across human space about the Valkyrie ultimatum. She was the highest-ranking military officer in the Human Defense Force and had to make the most important decision in human history. The choice was simple but terrible. Humanity could surrender and become slaves of the Valkyrie Empire, or they could fight a war they could not possibly win. Admiral Seo called together the Human Defense Council in an emergency session. The council members arrived from around the world within hours. They represented every human colony and settlement, from the oldest worlds near Earth to the newest outposts on the Galactic Rim. Each member knew that the decision they made would determine whether humanity survived as a free species. The council chamber was quiet as Admiral Seo presented the situation. The holographic displays showed Valkyrie fleet movements and the locations of human worlds. The enemy had positioned their forces to attack multiple targets simultaneously. Even if humanity used every ship and weapon they possessed, they could not defend all their colonies at the same time. Some council members argued for negotiation. Perhaps the Valkyrie would accept partial surrender or tribute payments instead of complete conquest. Others suggested that humanity should evacuate their outer colonies and concentrate their defenses around Earth and the core worlds. At least some humans might survive even if the outer settlements were lost. Admiral SEO listened to all these suggestions, but her mind was already made up. She had studied the history of every species that had encountered the Valkyrie Empire. Those who surrendered were enslaved and eventually eliminated when they were no longer useful. Those who fought were destroyed immediately, but at least died as free beings. The ultimatum deadline was approaching fast. Valkyrie fleets were already entering human space and taking positions around the outer colonies. Soon, they would demand an answer, and Admiral Lesio would have to give them one. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the decision could not be delayed any longer. As the council session continued, reports came in from across human space. The Valkyrie were not waiting for the deadline to expire. They were already beginning to surround human worlds and jamming communications between colonies. The attack would begin soon, whether humanity surrendered or not. Admiral Essio stood up and looked at each council member. Her decision would echo through history, and she wanted everyone to understand the consequences. Humanity was about to face its greatest challenge, and there would be no second chances. Admiral Boram Essio stood in the communication center deep beneath Earth's surface. The room was filled with screens showing every human colony and the Valkyrie fleet surrounding them. She had made her decision, and now it was time to tell the galaxy what humanity had chosen. Her hands were steady as she activated the transmission system that would broadcast her message across known space. The message went out on all frequencies and in every major galactic language. Admiral SEO looked directly into the camera with cold, determined eyes. Her voice was calm and clear when she spoke the words that would change everything. You want war? Then watch your worlds burn. The transmission lasted only 30 seconds, but every species in the galaxy would remember those words forever. The Valkyrie fleet commander, Thekvar, received the message aboard his massive flagship. He laughed when he heard it, thinking that the humans had gone insane with fear. Other species across the galaxy had similar reactions. The peaceful Altarians shook their heads in sadness, believing humanity was choosing suicide. The trading species of the Nexus Confederation began calculating how to profit from the coming destruction. The isolated quantum collective simply observed and waited to see what would happen. None of them understood what they had just witnessed. Humanity had not declared war in the traditional sense. They had announced something much more dangerous and permanent. Admiral SEO's message was not a threat or a challenge. It was a promise. Captain Hyen-Woo Park received new orders aboard the Indomitable while the ship moved through deep space. The orders were encrypted with codes he had never seen before and marked with the highest security classification in the human military. When he decoded the message, he found instructions for something called Protocol Omega. The name meant nothing to him, but the orders were very specific and very strange. Protocol Omega required Captain Park to modify his ship's weapon systems and prepare for a type of mission that seemed impossible. The orders told him to remove all traditional weapons and replace them with equipment that looked more like mining tools than military hardware. His crew would need to train for combat operations that made no sense according to normal military doctrine. Lieutenant Tae-ho Yoon lead a team of Marine soldiers in preparing the new equipment. The gear looked primitive and simple compared to the advanced weapons they normally carried. Instead of plasma rifles and energy shields, they were loading their transport ships with devices that seemed designed for asteroid mining and planetary excavation. The molecular disruptors were tools normally used to break apart space rocks, not fight enemy soldiers. Lieutenant Yoon did not question his orders, but he wondered how such equipment could be effective against the heavily armored Valkyrie warriors. The enemy soldiers wore thick, shell-like armor that could stop most weapons. Their ships were protected by energy shields that could deflect the most powerful human weapons. Yet somehow these simple mining tools were supposed to make a difference in the coming battle. Dr. Suman Lee continued her analysis of Valkyrie biological samples in her laboratory aboard the Indomitable. What she discovered made her understand why Admiral Essio had rejected any possibility of negotiation. The Valkyrie were not just aggressive by choice. Their entire species had been genetically programmed for conquest and domination. Over millions of years of evolution, the Valkyrie brain structure showed no areas responsible for empathy or cooperation with other species. They were literally incapable of keeping peace treaties or showing mercy to defeated enemies. Any agreement they made would be broken as soon as it became convenient. Surrender would only delay human extinction, not prevent it. Dr. Lee's findings confirmed that Admiral Essio had made the only logical choice. On the military base of New Seoul, pilot Yoon-Hae Nam volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. She was one of humanity's best fighter pilots and had never lost a battle, but this assignment was different from anything she had ever attempted. Her squadron would be the first to engage the Valkyrie fleet, and they were not expected to return. Pilot Nam's ships were being modified with the same strange equipment that other human forces were receiving. The molecular disruptors were mounted on her fighter craft in place of normal weapons. The modifications made her ship slower and less maneuverable, but apparently that was necessary for the mission to succeed. She trusted her commanders even if she did not understand their strategy. The other pilots in her squadron were also volunteers who knew they were probably flying to their deaths. They had all lost friends or family when the Valkyrie destroyed the 3 human frontier worlds. This was their chance to strike back at the enemy, even if it cost them their lives. Each pilot prepared for the mission with the careful attention to detail that might make the difference between success and failure. Meanwhile, the Valkyrie fleet began its advance toward the human core worlds. Fleet Admiral Krezeth commanded the largest military force in galactic history. His ships moved in perfect formation through space, confident that nothing could stop them. The humans had rejected surrender, but that only meant the conquest would be more entertaining. Fleet Admiral Krezeth had conquered 47 different species during his long career. Some had surrendered immediately and been enslaved. Others had fought bravely and been destroyed. The humans seemed to be choosing the second option, which was fine with him. His soldiers enjoyed a good battle, and completely destroying the human species would send a clear message to any other species that might consider resistance. The Valkyrie ships were equipped with weapons that could crack planets and defenses that had never been penetrated. Their smallest escort vessels carried more firepower than the largest human battleships. The humans had no chance of victory in conventional warfare, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. What the galaxy did not know was that humans had never intended to fight a conventional war. While other species developed bigger ships and more powerful weapons, humanity had been working on something completely different. They had been preparing for this exact situation for decades, and their preparations were about to be revealed. The countdown to battle continued as both fleets moved toward their confrontation. The Valkyrie expected an easy victory that would add another conquered species to their empire. The humans were planning something that would shock the entire galaxy and change the balance of power forever. The stage was set for a conflict unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Pilot Yunhei Nam sat in the cockpit of her modified fighter ship as it approached the massive Valkyrie advance fleet. Her squadron of 12 ships looked tiny compared to the enemy vessels that filled the space around them. The Valkyrie ships were enormous metal fortresses covered in weapon turrets and armor plating. Each one could destroy a small moon if its commanders wished. The human fighters moved forward in a loose formation that seemed almost casual. The Valkyrie fleet commanders watched them approach with amusement rather than concern. These small ships posed no threat to their mighty vessels. The humans were either making a desperate last gesture or they had gone completely insane with fear. Pilot Nam checked her instruments one final time. The molecular disruptors mounted on her ship were charged and ready. She still did not fully understand how these mining tools were supposed to damage enemy warships, but she trusted the scientists who had designed this mission. Her job was to deliver the payload, not to question the strategy. The Valkyrie opened fire first. Massive energy beams lanced out from their ships toward the approaching human fighters. The beams were powerful enough to cut through asteroid belts and could vaporize normal spacecraft instantly. Several of the human ships disappeared in bright flashes of light as the enemy weapons found their targets. Pilot Nam's ship shook as enemy fire passed close by her cockpit. She could feel the heat from the energy beams even through her ship's shielding. Her squadron continued forward despite the devastating fire from the Valkyrie fleet. More human ships were destroyed with each passing second, but the survivors pressed on with their attack. The remaining human fighters reached the outer edge of the Valkyrie formation. Instead of firing weapons at the enemy ships, they did something that confused the Valkyrie commanders completely. The human ships flew directly into the hull plating of the largest Valkyrie vessels and activated their molecular disruptors at point-blank range. The disruptors created small holes in the enemy ship hulls. The holes were not large enough to cause serious damage, but they allowed the human fighters to deposit their mysterious cargo directly inside the Valkyrie vessels. Each human ship carried dozens of small containers that scattered throughout the enemy ships before the fighters were finally destroyed by defensive fire. Pilot Nam's ship was among the last to complete its mission. She flew her fighter straight into the side of the Valkyrie flagship and activated her disruptors. The containers from her ship spread throughout the massive vessel like seeds scattered by the wind. Her fighter exploded in a ball of flames seconds later, but her mission was complete. The Valkyrie fleet commanders celebrated what appeared to be an easy victory. All 12 human fighters had been destroyed without causing any visible damage to the enemy fleet. The small holes in their ship hulls were already being sealed by automatic repair systems. The human attack had been a complete failure that accomplished nothing except the deaths of brave but foolish pilots. Fleet Admiral Krezeth broadcast a message to the remaining human forces. He mocked their futile gesture and promised that the destruction of their worlds would begin immediately. The human pilots had died for nothing. and soon all of humanity would join them in death. The Valkyrie Empire would add another species to its collection of conquered civilizations. On Earth, Dr. Min-Seok Oh monitored the first phase of the operation from his laboratory deep underground. He was a quantum physicist who had spent years developing the technology that Pilot Nam and her squadron had just delivered to the enemy fleet. The containers scattered throughout the Valkyrie ships contained billions of microscopic machines that were about to change the course of the war. Dr. Oh watched his instruments carefully as the nanobots activated inside the Valkyrie vessels. These tiny machines were designed to interface with Valkyrie technology and spread throughout their computer networks. The nanobots were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were something much more dangerous and permanent. The nanobots began their work immediately after being deployed. They moved through the Valkyrie ships like an invisible plague, copying themselves and spreading to every computer system they could find. The Valkyrie had no defense against enemies they could not see or detect with their instruments. Hacker specialist Dayun Wu sat at her command station in a hidden bunker on the moon. She had been waiting for this moment ever since the nanobots were first conceived and developed. Her job was to activate the second phase of the operation once the microscopic machines had spread throughout the enemy fleet. Dayun's fingers moved across her control interfaces as she established contact with the nanobots inside the Valkyrie ships. The tiny machines had already infected hundreds of enemy vessels and were continuing to spread at an exponential rate. Soon, every ship in the Valkyrie fleet would be compromised, and then the real attack would begin. The nanobots were not designed to simply disable the Valkyrie ships. Their purpose was much more thorough and devastating. They began systematically dismantling the enemy vessels at the molecular level, starting with the most critical systems first. The process was invisible to the Valkyrie crews, but the results would soon become obvious. Commander Jin-Ho Kim coordinated the evacuation of human colonies while secretly positioning hidden observation posts throughout the Outer Rim territories. His job was to monitor Valkyrie reactions to the nanobots and gather intelligence about their spread patterns. What he discovered exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The nanobots were not limiting themselves to the ships that had been directly infected. They were designed to target any technology that shared Valkyrie quantum signatures, and they were spreading through the enemy's communication networks to reach distant targets. Every message the Valkyrie sent was carrying the infection to new locations. Fleet Admiral Krizith began receiving disturbing reports from his ship commanders. Systems throughout the fleet were experiencing random failures and malfunctions. The problem started small, but grew worse with each passing hour. Equipment that had worked perfectly for decades was suddenly breaking down for no apparent reason. The Valkyrie engineering teams worked frantically to identify and fix the problems, but they could not find the source of the failures. Their diagnostic equipment showed no signs of damage or sabotage. The systems simply stopped functioning as if they were aging decades in a matter of hours. As the problems spread throughout the fleet, Fleet Admiral Krizith realized that the human attack had not been a failure after all. The small containers delivered by the suicide fighters had contained something that was destroying his ships from within. The humans had not tried to win a conventional battle. They had infected the entire Valkyrie fleet with some kind of technological disease. The realization came too late to prevent the disaster that was already unfolding. The nanobots had spread beyond the immediate fleet and were reaching toward the Valkyrie homeworld through the Empire's own communication networks. The humans had not just attacked a military force, they had launched an assault on Valkyrie civilization itself. Dr. Hai Wenbei watched from her deep space observation station as the nanobots reached the Valkyrie homeworld of Valkyrie Prime. The massive planet had been the center of the Valkyrie Empire for thousands of years. Its surface was covered with enormous cities built from metal and stone, connected by transportation networks that spanned entire continents. The planet's defense systems were legendary throughout the galaxy. Orbital weapons platforms surrounded Valkyrie Prime like a protective shell. Each platform carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets of enemy ships. Energy shields covered the most important cities, and underground bunkers could protect millions of Valkyrie civilians from any attack. Dr. Bay monitored the nanobots as they spread through the planet's communication networks. The tiny machines moved like an invisible army through every computer system and electronic device on the world. Within hours, they had infected the defense grid, the power systems, and the transportation networks that kept Valkyrie civilization running. The first sign of trouble came when the orbital defense platforms began shutting down one by one. The massive weapons that had protected the homeworld for centuries went silent as their control systems failed. The energy shields covering the cities flickered and disappeared. The underground bunkers sealed themselves shut, trapping the Valkyrie inside their own shelters. The nanobots were designed to be thorough and systematic in their destruction. They did not simply break things randomly. Instead, they targeted the most critical systems first and worked their way down to less important equipment. The result was a complete collapse of technological civilization on the most advanced world in the Velkari Empire. Colonel Sungjin Park, lead human ground forces, in a completely new type of warfare. His troops did not carry traditional weapons or fight conventional battles. Instead, they deployed atmospheric processors that began changing the air composition of Velkari worlds to make them uninhabitable for the insect-like aliens. The Velk had evolved to breathe a specific mixture of gases that was different from the atmosphere preferred by most other species. Colonel Park's atmospheric processors began converting the air on conquered Velkari worlds to a composition that would slowly suffocate the native population. The process was invisible and impossible to stop once it began. The atmospheric changes happened gradually over several days. At first, the Velkari noticed only minor breathing difficulties. Then the problems became more serious as the oxygen levels dropped and other gases increased. The hard-shelled aliens began struggling to survive in the air they had breathed. All their lives, Velkari civilians tried to evacuate their homeworld and other major planets. But their transportation systems were failing due to the nano. Ships that had functioned perfectly for decades suddenly lost power or navigation control. Space elevators collapsed when their control systems shut down. Even simple ground vehicles stopped working as their electronic components were consumed by the microscopic invaders. The galaxy watched in horror as the mighty Velkari Empire began collapsing within days of the human response. Species that had feared Velkari conquest for centuries could hardly believe what they were seeing. The empire that had destroyed dozens of civilizations was being systematically dismantled by a species most aliens considered primitive and weak. Ambassador Rina Zhang represented humanity at an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The other species demanded to know what weapons the humans were using and how they could be stopped. Ambassador Zhang calmly explained that this was humanity's standard response to existential threats. Any species that tried to eliminate humanity would face complete destruction in return. The other council members were shocked by the ambassador's casual tone. She spoke about the destruction of an entire civilization as if it were a normal business transaction. The humans were not angry or emotional about their actions. They were simply implementing a policy they had developed long before the current conflict began. Scientist Yuri Shin revealed the true scope of human preparation to the terrified galactic representatives. Humanity had been analyzing every known hostile species for decades and developing specific countermeasures for each one. The Velkari had been studied and targeted from the moment they first appeared on human sensors. Years ago, the nanobots used against the Velkari were just one example of humanity's defensive preparations. Dr. Shin explained that similar weapons had been developed for every major species in the galaxy. Each weapon was designed to target the specific weaknesses and dependencies of different alien civilizations. Humanity was prepared to destroy any species that threatened their existence. The Galactic Council realized that humanity's peaceful appearance had been camouflaged for something much more dangerous. While other species had focused on building larger armies and more powerful weapons, humans had been developing ways to eliminate entire civilizations without fighting traditional battles. Fleet Admiral Krizith made a desperate attempt to contact the human leadership and negotiate a surrender. His once mighty fleet was now drifting helplessly through space as the nanobots consumed every electronic system aboard his ships. Most of his vessels had lost life support and were becoming tombs for their crews. The Admiral's communication equipment barely functioned as he tried to reach Admiral Essio on Earth. When the connection was finally established, he begged for mercy and offered to withdraw all Velkari forces from human space. He promised that his species would never threaten humanity again if the nanobots could be stopped. Admiral Essio listened to the Velkari commanders' pleas with the same cold expression she had worn when delivering humanity's ultimatum. She informed Fleet Admiral Krizith that the nanobots could not be stopped or recalled. They were designed to continue their work until every piece of Velkari technology was destroyed or abandoned. The human admiral explained that the Velkari had chosen this fate when they threatened to exterminate humanity. The nanobots were not just a weapon but a permanent solution to the Velkari threat. The insect-like species would never again possess the technology needed to conquer other worlds or threaten peaceful civilizations. Reports came in from across Velkari space as world after world fell to the infection spread through the Empire's own communication networks faster than any evacuation could proceed. Planets that had never been directly attacked found their technology failing as the microscopic machines reached them through routine data transmissions. The Velkari Empire, which had taken centuries to build, was being destroyed in a matter of days. The species that had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved countless billions now faced extinction themselves. Their technology was being systematically eliminated, leaving them helpless on worlds that could no longer support their civilization. The galaxy began to understand that humanity's threat had not been empty words. When humans said they would make their enemies' worlds burn, they meant it literally. The Valkyrie homeworld and colonies were becoming uninhabitable wastelands as their infrastructure collapsed and their atmosphere changed. The Valkyrie Empire was gone. Captain Duhyan Lee of the human vessel Retribution moved through what had once been the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The space around him was filled with dead ships drifting silently through the darkness. Their hulls were intact, but everything inside had stopped working. The nanobots had consumed every electronic component and left. Only empty metal shells behind. Captain Lee's mission was to oversee the complete dismantling of Valkyrie space infrastructure. Human salvage teams worked methodically through the wreckage, collecting useful materials and ensuring that no Valkyrie technology remained functional. The process was thorough and systematic, leaving nothing that could be repaired or reactivated. The few surviving Valkyrie had abandoned their high-tech cities and fled to primitive worlds without advanced technology. These refugees lived in caves, in simple shelters, afraid to use any electronic devices that might attract the attention of the nanobot. Their mighty empire had been reduced to scattered groups of survivors hiding in the wilderness. Captain Lee watched as human engineers demolished the massive space stations that had once controlled Valkyrie trade routes. The structures were broken apart piece by piece and their materials sorted for recycling. Where the Valkyrie Empire had once ruled, human outposts were being established to monitor the region and prevent any attempts at rebuilding. On Earth, the leaders of other galactic species requested emergency meetings with human representatives. The Altarians Nexus Confederation and Quantum Collective had formed a desperate alliance to understand and potentially contain what they now saw as the greatest threat in galactic history. They no longer viewed humanity as a young and primitive species, but as something far more. DANGEROUS. Dr. J. Huan Yu presented evidence to the Galactic Council that shocked even the most experienced diplomats. Human intelligence agencies had been developing countermeasures against every known species for decades. The presentation included detailed plans for destroying the technology and infrastructure of dozens of different civilizations. Each species in the galaxy was cataloged with their specific weaknesses and dependencies. The peaceful Alt could be eliminated by targeting their atmospheric processors that maintained their homeworld's delicate ecosystem. The Trading Nexus Confederation relied on quantum communication networks that could be disrupted by specialized viruses. Even the mysterious Quantum Collective had vulnerabilities that human scientists had identified and studied. Dr. Yu explained that the Valkyrie had simply been the first species to trigger humanity's defensive protocols. Every other civilization was one ultimatum away from facing the same fate. The humans had been patient observers while other species focused on expansion and conquest. But they had been preparing for conflict all along. The galactic representatives realized that humanity's apparent weakness had been calculated deception, while other species built impressive fleets and competed for territory. Humans had been developing ways to destroy entire civilizations without traditional warfare. Their strategy was not to win battles, but to eliminate threats permanently. General Kung Heon addressed the terrified alien delegates and explained humanity's military doctrine in simple terms. Humans did not fight wars to gain resources or territory like other species. They fought wars to ensure that threats to human survival could never emerge again. The goal was not victory but the complete prevention of future conflicts. The general's words sent chills through the assembled alien representatives. They had assumed that warfare was about conquest and dominance, with winners claiming the possessions of the defeated. Humanity operated under completely different principles that seemed designed to erase enemies from existence rather than simply defeat them. General Han revealed that humanity's preparations went far beyond military technology. Human agents had infiltrated the governments and institutions of every major species in the galaxy. These operatives had been gathering intelligence and positioning themselves for decades, waiting for orders that might never come. The infiltration was so complete that some species discovered their own leaders had been working for humanity for years. Key decisions that had seemed like normal policy choices were revealed to be part of human strategies to weaken potential enemies. The galaxy had been shaped by human influence without anyone realizing it. Ambassador Su Jinkong delivered humanity's new position to the galactic community with the same calm certainty that had characterized all human communications during the crisis. Any species that threatened human civilians would face complete technological and biological warfare, designed specifically for their destruction. The Valkyrie had been an example, not an exception. The ambassador made it clear that humanity considered preemptive action to be justified self-defense. Species that showed aggressive tendencies toward others were potential threats to humanity and might face elimination before they could act. The galaxy would operate under new rules with humanity as the ultimate arbiters of acceptable behavior. The surviving Valkyrie, led by Subcommander the Kennel, attempted to warn other species about human capabilities. They described the nano and atmospheric processors in desperate messages broadcast across the galaxy. Most aliens dismissed these warnings as the ravings of a defeated enemy trying to turn others against the victors. The few species that took the warnings seriously began their own investigations into human activities. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. Human operatives were everywhere, and human scientists had been studying every species for weaknesses that could be exploited in future conflicts. The Quantum Collective, despite their advanced technology and secretive nature, found evidence of human surveillance in their most secure facilities. The trading networks of the Nexus Confederation contained hidden monitoring systems that had been reporting to human intelligence for years. Even the peaceful Altarians discovered that their atmospheric data had been secretly copied and analyzed. The galaxy began to understand that the Valkyrie crisis had not been an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern. Humanity had been preparing for galactic dominance from the moment they achieved space travel. Their peaceful exploration missions had been intelligence-gathering operations designed to identify and catalog potential threats. Species that had welcomed human traders, and diplomats realized they had been allowing enemy agents into their territories. The humans had used their reputation for curiosity and friendliness to gain access to sensitive information and strategic locations. Every act of apparent cooperation had been part of a long-term plan for control. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. The mighty Valkyrie Empire was gone, reduced to primitive survivors hiding on backward worlds. Other species now lived under the constant threat of similar destruction if they displeased their new human overlords. The present age of competitive expansion was over, replaced by an era of human dominance. 6 months had passed since the Valkyrie Empire issued their ultimatum to humanity. The galaxy was a very different place now. Admiral Borum Essio stood in her command center on the former Valkyrie homeworld of Valkar Prime, watching as human construction teams built research stations where proud alien cities had once stood. The planet that had been the center of galactic conquest for thousands of years was now a human colony dedicated to studying alien species and their weaknesses. Massive laboratories covered the surface where Valkyrie palaces had been demolished. Scientists from Earth worked around the clock to catalog and analyze every form of alien technology they could find. Admiral Essio had been promoted to Supreme Commander of Galactic Operations, a position that had not existed before the war. Her responsibility was to oversee the transformation of former Valkyrie territories into human research facilities and monitoring stations. The work was proceeding ahead of schedule. With new installations coming online every week, Dr. Inho Choi led teams of engineers and scientists who were reverse engineering captured alien technologies. Their goal was not to copy these devices, but to understand them well enough to develop more efficient methods of destroying them. Every weapon, shield, and communication system used by galactic species was being studied for weaknesses that could be exploited in future conflicts. The research was incredibly detailed and thorough. Dr. Choi's teams had created comprehensive databases covering the technology of every known species in the galaxy. They knew exactly how to disable Altarian atmospheric processors, how to crash Nexus trading networks, and how to penetrate Quantum Collective security systems. Human scientists were also developing new weapons based on their studies of alien biology and psychology. The nanobots used against the Valkyrie were just the beginning. More sophisticated devices were being created that could target specific genetic markers or exploit particular behavioral patterns found in different species. Intelligence Director Ha-Young Lim managed the vast network of human agents that had been revealed throughout the galaxy. These operatives were no longer hiding their activities but were openly monitoring alien governments and reporting back to Earth. Any species that showed signs of developing anti-human sentiment was immediately flagged for closer observation. Intelligence network was so extensive that most alien leaders had learned to assume their private conversations were being monitored by human agents. This knowledge changed how they spoke and acted, creating a climate of fear and self-censorship that effectively prevented organized resistance to human dominance. Director Lim's agents also worked to identify and recruit collaborators among alien populations. Many aliens had decided that cooperation with humanity was preferable to the fate that had befallen the Valkyrie. These collaborators provided valuable intelligence and helped maintain order in their respective territories. The Altarians, Confederation, and Quantum Collective had formed their desperate alliance to contain human expansion, but their efforts were failing badly. Human infiltration of their governments was so complete that most of their planning sessions were being reported to Earth before they ended. The alliance members discovered that several of their key leaders had been working for humanity for years. Decisions they thought were their own had actually been suggested or influenced by human agents. Their attempts to develop countermeasures against human technology were being sabotaged from within their own organizations. Captain Ji-Wan Nam commanded the first human dreadnought built with combined human and alien technology. The massive ship, called Dominion, was larger and more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. It incorporated the best features of Valkyrie engineering with human innovations in warfare and control systems. The Dominion served as both a weapon and a symbol of humanity's New position in the galaxy. Captain Nam's ship could single-handedly destroy entire fleets of conventional alien vessels. Its mere presence in a star system was enough to discourage any thoughts of rebellion or resistance. The ship's weapons included improved versions of the nanobots that had destroyed the Valkyrie Empire. These new devices could be deployed over vast distances and were designed to target multiple species simultaneously. The Dominion could eliminate entire civilizations without its crew ever setting foot on enemy worlds. Captain Nam's orders were to patrol the galaxy and demonstrate human power to any species that might be considering hostile actions. The ship's route took it through every major alien territory on a regular schedule, reminding everyone of what had happened to those who threatened humanity. President Seo Gin-yoon addressed the Earth Assembly in a speech that was broadcast throughout human space and intercepted by every alien intelligence service in the galaxy. He revealed that the Valkyrie conflict had been a test of humanity's readiness for galactic leadership. The results had exceeded all expectations. The president explained that humanity's expansion into the galaxy was only beginning. The peaceful exploration missions of the past had been preparation for a more active role in galactic affairs. Humanity would no longer be content to observe from the sidelines while other species fought wars and oppressed weaker civilizations. President Yoon announced the beginning of what he called the pacification protocol for species that had shown aggressive tendencies toward others in the past. Human forces would visit these worlds to ensure they could no longer threaten peaceful civilizations. The process would be thorough and permanent. The final scene showed human ships departing Earth toward dozens of alien worlds throughout the galaxy. Each vessel carried the same nanobots that had destroyed the Valkyrie Empire, along with atmospheric processors, biological weapons, and other devices designed for specific alien species. The ships moved through space with quiet confidence, knowing that their targets had no effective defenses against the weapons they carried. The galaxy had wanted war when they threatened humanity. Now they would live forever under the shadow of human retribution. As the human fleet dispersed across the galaxy, alien leaders watched helplessly from their worlds. They had learned too late that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or weapons but their patience and planning. While other species had competed for temporary advantages, humans had prepared for permanent dominance. The age of galactic warfare was ending, replaced by an era of human peace enforced through the threat of total destruction. Any species that disturbed this peace would face the same fate as the Valkyrie Empire. Their worlds would burn, their technology would fail, and their civilization would be erased from the galaxy. The human message was clear and final. The galaxy now belonged to humanity, and any species that forgot this lesson would be reminded in the most permanent way possible.